Happy Sunday, everyone. Josh's severe weather. Hope you all are doing well this weekend and got maybe an extra hour of sleep last night. But we are very busy in the tropics for November. Our potential second storm of the month of November is set to form here in the next 24 hours. The next name would be Rafael. And that is something that we do need to keep an eye on across not just the Caribbean, of course, but even the Gulf of Mexico, as the current prediction that I have is that it does make it to the Gulf as a hurricane. Now, after that, some weakening expected, but we are still going to have to monitor, especially across the Florida Keys and potentially all the way to Louisiana to the Florida Gulf Coast here later next week. So right now, we just have an invest, 97L. We are going to have aircraft flying into the storm here about 1 in the afternoon Eastern time, noon Central time. And they will start to figure out where the center is forming and where it's expected to go. But we could have tropical storm watches in effect later today for Jamaica and maybe even beyond for Cuba and the Cayman Islands. We also need to keep an eye on things here along a front that continues to hang out right near Hispaniola, the Turks and Caicos, and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Models continue to hint that areas of low pressure could spin up off of that one. In fact, has a 10% chance of forming here in the next couple of days, albeit I'm more concerned about what might happen after that later on in the week. So here is the plan from the Hurricane Center. We have a flight going in, NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft here. Actually, this will be an Air Force One. Both of them will be. The first one should get in there at 1 o'clock this afternoon. The second one will get in at about 12:30 in the morning while we're sleeping, and then a third one expected to get in here at about 6:30 in the morning Eastern time tomorrow. We're going to continue those 6-hour fixes, and that area right now has an 80% chance of becoming a depression or storm between now and Tuesday morning, and a 90% chance. And I do think it's developing. All the models are showing it developing, so I expect these chances will go up until we have a potential cyclone and then eventually Tropical Storm Rafael. Now, we do have subtropical storm Patty, and don't even get me started on why this was named, but it's moving through the Azores, and they are getting tropical storm force winds, albeit it's not really a tropical system, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then we've got an area here that has a 10% chance of trying to become a quick depression or low-end tropical storm, really in the next couple of days. After that point, it is going to get sucked up by Rafael, which will be moving up towards Jamaica and southern Cuba. Here's a look at the tropics for you all to see here. This is the invest we are watching. It's still pretty broad, but if there's a center, it's probably somewhere in here. This is the area that we're monitoring north of Hispaniola, and really a lot of wind shear carrying thunderstorms away to the east of that. So it doesn't look like it's going to form yet. And then we've got a couple of regions we do need to keep an eye on here along the tail of the front and from the tropics here. These are expected to kind of move, generally speaking, in this direction. And models do indicate some potential down the road development in here, but that is a way off at this point still. This is a subtropical storm Patty right now, and I'll talk a little bit about Patty. And honestly, it's hooked up with this front here, so I don't even know why it's being given a name, albeit the fact is winds did get up to about 60 miles per hour over the Azores Islands. But you know what? We had a storm here in the middle of September that did not get named, that was not hooked up to a front, so who knows? Again, the Hurricane Center just continues to question a lot of, I continue to question a lot of what they're doing, and I do it with respect, just so you all know, but I don't always agree with it. So I'm a meteorologist as well, and I guess I'm entitled to some of my own knowledge and opinions as well. Here's a look at the Southwest Caribbean, and again, it's very broad, but we are seeing a pretty significant flare-up of storms here north of Panama and Colombia. But if there's a center, and we don't know yet if there is one, it's probably somewhere under this area of thunderstorms. Really tough to see at this point, and that's why the aircraft will be going in there to take a closer look under the hood at what we can't see yet under satellite. The other area that we're watching here, I don't think is going to develop anymore. You can kind of see there's a mid-level low up here, but the surface low is probably somewhere in here, and it's not coming together at this point. So I don't think that's going to get named. And the good news is that the Gulf of Mexico right now remains pretty quiet. Here's a closer look at the Central Atlantic. And you can see here we do have multiple areas to keep an eye on. This is the tail end of a front, and this is a tropical wave. And usually this time of the year, these don't really develop, but we are in a very favorable phase of what's called the Madden-Julian Oscillation, which I'm going to show you here, which is typically this time of the year, it does go through phases, but not nearly as extreme. We're halfway from basically neutral all the way to the end of the spectrum. So in these phases in here is when things are certainly going to be potentially active on this side of the globe. When things are on this side here, it's going to be more active across the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. So we head through these phases here right through the middle of November. And the November record, by the way, for named storms in the Atlantic Basin is 3. And I think we're going to have number 2 here in the next day. And we may see more here next week into the following. So we may break that record along with other records that we've already set this hurricane season. We didn't certainly have the most named storms, but we had one of the earliest Category 5s on record, Beryl. We also had some incredible intensification here. Tornadoes spawned. We were up the list with that with Beryl, and I believe also with Helene. Helene was one of our top 5 storms. And intensification. Oscar was the fastest intensification ever from a depression to a hurricane. Now, I think it was probably a depression before they called it one, but that took 12 hours. And Hurricane Milton was the fastest to go from depression to Category 5 in just 2 days. And that was our 5th strongest storm. So regardless, just a pretty crazy season so far here, even though the named storms has not been off the chart, but we may be in the top 10 for that too. All right, here's a look at water temperatures. This over here somehow is where subtropical Patty is. Subtropical storm Patty, where water temperatures are in the 70s. Subtropical meaning the upper level part of it is cold, getting its energy from basically non-tropical processes, but getting moisture and getting fuel from tropical ocean waters. So kind of a hybrid type storm. But the areas we're watching remain well above average here, 29, 30, 31 Celsius, which gets us at about 85, 86, 87 Fahrenheit. And those temperatures remain above average. In fact, very much above average is why we're seeing this action out here, but quite a bit above average as well across this portion of the Atlantic. And I don't see that changing quite a bit in the next few months. Here's a look at Patty real quick, and you can see here's the center moving right over the eastern Azores. And here's the front that it's still kind of hooked up with. In my opinion, I don't know if you can classify this as subtropical, but whatever. But this is a webcam from Windy here, and you can see the tropical rain bands moving across. The waves that were up higher a little bit earlier. But yeah, I mean, it's heading towards Spain. It's heading towards Portugal, but it will be a remnant low at that point. It is not going to hit the same area that had the flooding last week, Valencia. In fact, it's going to just clip through the northwestern part of Spain and will be much weaker by the time it leaves. But we do still have tropical storm warnings for all of the Azores, even though, in my opinion, these parts are pretty much in the all clear at this point. So that's all I'm really going to say about Patty. I'm not even going to talk about her tomorrow, but you all can see here pretty good agreement on everything and going into a much drier environment here. So unlikely to remain tropical or even subtropical. All right, let's take a look here at what's going on with our next few systems. This would be Rafael. And you can see here likely to come up towards the western side of Jamaica by Tuesday and then turn up towards western Cuba. After that, going into the southern Gulf of Mexico. There's divergence in where the models take it. It's either going to go up into Florida or it's going to go south of Louisiana, and I'll talk more about what can happen. And then we need to keep an eye again on the Caribbean Sea in about a week or so, as there could be additional development. And personally, I think there's maybe a better chance on this side than down in here due to the fact that the front's going to be farther north, but we'll see. This is just an idea that we may have something more to watch here in the following week. Here's a look at wind shear for you all to see. And let me move this along to today's run. And you can see that was last week. But here we go, where the wind shear is dropping off in the Western Caribbean. It's still very high over Cuba and Hispaniola, which is why I question that 10%. But you can see over time here, the wind shear does drop significantly. And we have much below wind shear, typically in the 10 to 20 knot range. So it's not zero, but it's low enough where there's warm water to support a hurricane here near Cuba. As we get into the Gulf of Mexico, the wind shear is quite a bit higher once you get north of this line. So down in here, a very favorable environment for a stronger system. But once that system comes up here, it's like Penn State's offense. Get to the 5-yard line, it can't produce. It hits a wall, just can't do anything. So I could say that because I'm a Penn State fan. I'm frustrated like all of them. But in all fairness, we've got a window for this to be a pretty significant system, probably a hurricane, But when we have something up in this direction, it's not going to do well. It's going to fade under pressure here due to the cooler water, the drier air mass, and the stronger wind shear. And you can see that the wind shear still remains quite a bit high, even though it's below average across the Florida Panhandle. So this is not going to hit the U.S. as a hurricane. The only areas I think that would potentially need to be concerned would be the Florida Keys and the southwest coast of Florida from some fringe effects if this gets close enough to that side of Florida. But once it comes farther north, it's going to be in a lot less favorable environment to survive that. Now, as we look ahead into next week, the wind shear remains pretty low down here, so I don't think we're done yet with the tropics. Again, we're going to guess at what circulation spins up, so I can't tell you for sure. We just need to watch. But even beyond Veterans Day, we head into a pretty favorable environment of low wind shear, basically from Cuba, the Yucatan on southward here. We're less than 20 knots of wind shear. So we stay in a favorable pattern. So I think it's possible we get our third named storm and maybe even a fourth named storm and break that record for November. So here's a closer look at Invest 97L. And you can see here, we do have wind shear. We do have a disorganization of thunderstorms, but we've got a lot more thunderstorm activity than, say, yesterday. So it's pretty much, set in stone here. This is going to become a depression or storm probably in the next day. Even though we do have somewhat of some drier air off to the north and west, some wind shear, we still have the typical lowering of pressures. This is coming underneath a ridge of high pressure. It's getting well ventilated. So I do think this is going to be developing here. Here's a look at where the models are taking the system. So you'll see it's going to be kind of slow moving to start and actually making more of a bend to the northeast. That's assuming it forms here. If it forms over here, that's going to change this whole forecast. But a pretty good agreement on our models that it's going to come up towards or just west of Jamaica here, probably Monday night into Tuesday. After that, it's going to reach some very favorable warm water here with low wind shear south of Cuba. Now, if the system goes over Jamaica and then hits Cuba right after, it's not going to become a hurricane, or it's going to have a very small chance to do that. But the more time it spends near the Cayman Islands or in this warm shelf here, the more intensification it potentially could have. And the models disagree on how that's going to play out, as they typically do this during this kind of formation phase. So we're not going to really know exactly how strong it gets, but I do feel it does have a good chance of becoming a hurricane if it makes it up into this region without spending really much time over land. Now, here's where the spread begins. When it goes north of Cuba, we've got a couple models that actually take it over the Florida Keys and dry Tortugas, and then we have a couple that take it over the western tip into probably the warmest portion of the Gulf. So a system that comes over into here probably has a better chance of still being a pretty good hurricane versus a weaker system that would be over in here. Now, as things come up to about this line here, say about 27 west, there's going to be an area of high pressure that drops down and tries to thwart this to the west. And if that happens, even though this looks scarier for Louisiana, the wind shear is going to be so strong that this is going to fade pretty quickly. And if you remember Hurricane Marco from 2020, that's the one that was right up ahead of Laura, which hit Lake Charles. That actually succumbed to that very strong wind shear and actually came up to the mouth of the Mississippi and basically fell apart, died on the doorstep. This would probably do the same kind of thing. However, if this system does not wait until that high comes down and has a way of going in this direction, then it could still be a stronger tropical storm coming up towards Florida, and that's something we need to keep an eye on here. Here's a look at the GFS ensembles, and you can see it's got that track to the west, but look at these pressures coming up. There's nothing that hits the northern Gulf Coast as a hurricane. The strongest I see here would be near Port St. Joe as a 990 tropical storm. So I'm not super worried about a hurricane strike farther north, but I am concerned about what could happen if this comes closer to Southwest Florida or the Keys. It may have that opportunity of maybe causing a little bit of damage, some flooding and tornadoes. But again, we've got several days before we're going to know exactly how that plays out. Here's the Canadian ensemble, and we do have some members that continue taking it west. But generally speaking, you can see that once it gets up to 27 north, after that, it is pretty uncertain, but it's going to weaken. And that's what my official forecast shows. Tropical storm here, but with a day or two more of spending time over hostile environments in the northern Gulf of Mexico. So that's what we're looking at here. This is the intensity forecast, and this is the troubling part. Until this system forms, there's a ton of uncertainty, but we've got quite a few models that do show hurricane intensity here, and these are tropical models. They're not the UK Met, which is this junk down here, which does poor when it comes to intensity. So definitely category one potential, category two maybe. This is an outlier, and I'm going to show you that in a minute too. That the latest run coming in is actually quite a bit weaker, so it's probably jumping the gun on this. But I think somewhere in here is going to be our more realistic solution. But 27 north, when we get to that point here, you can see generally speaking everything is going weaker at that time. So we are expecting to see some weakening of this storm. Here's a look at the HAFS model from weatherbell.com, just to give you guys an idea of what we're talking about here, what we're looking at. And generally speaking, the pressures do start coming down here later tomorrow, or later tonight and tomorrow morning. And we do have potentially a tropical storm approaching the south coast of Jamaica here in the afternoon. Now, this particular model does intensify the system because it keeps it just south and west of the west end of Jamaica in very warm water. And so it does have a hurricane here by the time we get to Tuesday. And unfortunately, that takes it right over Grand Cayman. Now, that's just one model. It can change, but this would be a potential hurricane strike on Grand Cayman if correct. Beyond that, takes it just south of the Isle of Youth. And this is a very strong system, a category 3 more than likely, but then weakening as it comes on shore western Cuba and then quite a bit weaker. But it does re-intensify the system into a hurricane as it's over the warmest, or as a strong hurricane, category 3 potentially, as it is over the warmest part of the Gulf of Mexico. But beyond that, we see significant drier air moving in. You can see here the wind field expands and our pressures are coming up significantly. So while this looks scary for the northern Gulf Coast, I don't think we should be scared because that pressure is going to start rising and the system is going to slow down if correct. Here's the HAFSB. And you'll see some different potential here. In fact, this one brings the storm to the south coast of Jamaica as a tropical storm here. Winds would probably be about 60 miles per hour if correct. Beyond that, it does show the system weakening due to that interaction with Jamaica. And we just have a tropical storm going between Grand Cayman and the Twin Sisters, I think it's called here. It does intensify the storm, though, into a hurricane after the Caymans, with a hit on the Isle of Youth here. This will be a category 2 storm here early in the day on Wednesday, and then moving over western Cuba and then regaining some intensity. This will be a category 2 hurricane, but well out over the Gulf of Mexico, well west of Florida. And then you can see the pressure doesn't quite come up yet. It's still pretty strong, but again, it hasn't reached 27 north yet. But you can see that drier air beginning to make its way in onto the western side of the storm. The HWRF, we don't have that plot for you, but I do want to show you this model here. It does have a tropical storm by tomorrow morning at this time. It does have a system coming into the Kingston area of Jamaica, and this would be a stronger tropical storm, maybe even borderline hurricane. So this would be a worst case scenario for Jamaica. You may want to prepare for a stronger tropical storm or hurricane just in case. But after it moves through Jamaica, it doesn't lose a beat here. It actually re-strengthens and becomes a category 2 hitting central Cuba here from the south. So this is much farther to the right than the other models. And then, of course, it'll weaken. But look at this. This has a hurricane moving over the dry Tortugas, producing some nasty weather for the Florida Keys and maybe some rough surf for southwest Florida here on Wednesday morning. The good news with this is that it is weakening as it comes north Wednesday night. But the bad news is that this is close enough to Tampa Bay to cause some storm surge. So I hope this is wrong. It is certainly an outlier, but it's something we need to keep an eye on because this would be a weakening system hitting very close to Cedar Key here as a tropical storm, probably 50, 60 mile per hour type storm. Certainly nothing like what we saw earlier in the season, but certainly the place we don't want to see something hit. So keep an eye on this. If correct, it is going to stall and fall apart very quickly inland, but produce quite a bit of rain here for parts of the Florida Peninsula. Here's a look at the GFS model just to show you all how this may be organized. And you can see here, it's in a pretty good moist environment. This particular run of the GFS has a tropical storm hitting just west of Kingston, moving right through the center of Jamaica and then strengthening to a category 1 and maybe category 2 hurricane, riding the south coast of Cuba, but it does not re-strengthen it after it enters the Gulf. And you can see there's a lot more dry air on the western and southwest side here that will certainly deter this system from staying strong. In fact, the GFS pulls all of the rain across Florida and takes whatever's left of it as leftovers here, which will die on the doorstep of Mobile Bay, it looks like. This would be like a food delivery that gets delivered to the wrong address and sits there for 8 hours. It's not going to look good. Sorry for my awful humor. I'm a dad. I got to have some bad humor. But this is not really something we need to be super worried with if the GFS is correct. Finally, the European model, not my favorite tropical model. It doesn't really develop our system very quickly, but it takes it just west of Jamaica here. And then you see it moving right through the Cayman Islands Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and then moving through Cuba here Wednesday afternoon and Wednesday night. And you can see here the wind shear and the dry air get in there as well on Thursday. And this is going to be much like the GFS, just a sloppy leftovers here south of Louisiana. It actually takes it towards Texas here, right over the Bolivar Peninsula, but this is really going to be pretty much a nothing burger at that point. So the biggest thing with this is going to be the rain for the next couple of days. Jamaica, Haiti, southern Cuba, southern Dominican Republic, we've got potentially 20 to 25 inches of rain coming. Just a very wet November, and over time, this is going to cause flooding in those mountainous areas. So we definitely need to be concerned about that. But yeah, we could see a pretty good dose of rain coming up through parts of the west coast of Florida as well, depending on where this ends up going. For Louisiana, Mississippi, even southeast Texas, this is not a big rainmaker for you. This is going to be dry air getting in on the western side. So if the areas that do want to see that rain are not going to see a whole lot. The areas that don't need the rain could see a lot more. So unfortunately, that just isn't really fair, but that's how this is looking. So here's a big view of Patty here over the Azores. Here's our disturbance, which is falling apart. Here's our future storm. And then in the Pacific, we've got an invest to watch. We have Lane, which was briefly a tropical storm, now falling apart, no threat to Hawaii. And it kind of pains me to say this, but I thought we were maybe done, but we've got a new tropical depression, which looks like it's going to come through the Philippine Sea and strengthen to a typhoon and maybe impact the Philippines, Cagayan, and Taiwan. Unfortunately, for the fourth time this season, is back in the path. Man, that is just going to be bad if that is correct. You can see here, I don't remember what the next name on the list is, but it's getting its act together pretty quickly. We'll probably already a tropical storm, and we have several ensemble members that take this near Taiwan and several that take it across Luzon and Cagayan. So obviously we need to be watching that one pretty closely as well. All right, in the United States, a big storm moving through severe weather this morning in parts of Oklahoma, massive trough ejecting out of the southwest here. We're going to see significant severe weather episodes here and lots of rain across this region as well. So I'm going to talk about that for a few minutes because it is important here. We do have pretty strong trough, as I had mentioned, lots of backside trough energy coming in through the southwest here, which is going to eventually rotate out tomorrow. And this could set up a pretty significant outbreak of severe weather, including some stronger tornadoes. That's going to roll through. It'll quiet down some by Tuesday, but we are not done after that. We've got more action coming later on in the week here towards Friday with another cutoff low pressure system. And then next week, we stay active here. This would be potentially a big rainmaker for California in the southwest. And this is a product of that recurving typhoon. So expect some significant winter weather in parts of the northwest as we head towards next upcoming week. We do have flash flood watches here for parts of the central and southern plains. We have severe weather, tornado watch, severe thunderstorm warnings into the Ozarks region, winter storm watches and advisories over portions of the Rockies and Northwest. And severe weather on track today. We have a slight risk for the Red River Valley and much of Oklahoma, a marginal risk into southern Nebraska and into northwestern Louisiana. There's a risk for tornadoes, 5% for the time being here across North Texas, across much of Oklahoma, and some wind and certainly large hail will be a possibility. So storm chasers will be out in full force here later today across this area. Tomorrow, though, things are expected to ramp up, and tomorrow is going to be a significant day for severe weather over eastern Oklahoma, northeastern Texas, western Arkansas, southwestern Missouri, maybe even into central Missouri and southeastern Kansas. And we do see the potential for some more significant tornadoes. We didn't get them with last week's system, but the potential is a little bit better here with this one, I think. In particular, right along the Red River here. Severe winds will also be a potential across much of this area, and severe hail across the Metroplex and the rest of the I-35 corridor. It'll be quieter on Tuesday. Whatever's left here, unlikely to be an organized severe weather outbreak, but we need to keep an eye on things around Memphis and all the way down to the Delta region here and maybe all the way to the Gulf Coast. Here's a look at one of our models that just kind of gives you all an idea of how active things are going to be. This is an MCS that will fade a little bit later today, But on the southern side of this, the outflow boundary lights up with some convergence and heating coming in from the south. And we're going to get more active this afternoon again across Texas and Oklahoma. Lots of rain, but lots of severe weather. I envision there being big time hail and some strong winds here and maybe a few tornadoes. And that's going to expand up into northern Arkansas and flood some areas overnight tonight. But tomorrow, this is where things are going to get particularly feisty, as you can see here. Right around late afternoon, we have multiple supercell type storms flaring up here ahead of this main system. And I do expect we're going to see multiple tornadoes coming out of this, assuming that this is correct. Even later tomorrow night, we still have a wind threat coming all the way down to near College Station and into the Arklatex region here. And then some heavy rain possible over southwest Louisiana, southeast Texas here for Tuesday morning. Here's a closer look at Oklahoma for everybody. Round one moving through now. We get a light break, and then here we go again this afternoon. Look at this. Big time action expected here. We could see some large gorilla hail across Wichita Falls, Lawton, and maybe just west of OKC here. This is going to be mid to late afternoon. This is 5 o'clock, so it'll be getting dark, but we'll still have severe weather over southeast Oklahoma into the overnight hours. And then it just continues to dump on us. We get a little bit of a break overnight, but here comes the next wave tomorrow morning west of OKC. And then look at the afternoon. This is going to be a really nasty setup here potentially. We do have some tornado potential. Let me pull that up to show you a quick sounding around Muskogee. And you're going to be able to see here that there is a tornado potential as those winds near the surface come around the southeasterly, but aloft they're out of the southwest, meaning that there's wind shear and that change in wind direction, which can add to the threat for tornadoes here. It'll be out of here by tomorrow evening, and then we should have quieter weather on Tuesday. Here's a look at where the potential for severe storms and helicity. This is rotating updraft potential here, rotating maybe thunderstorms that can produce tornadoes. And you can see it's very active here over the next few days. We just see multiple areas under the gun, centered on Oklahoma, but southern Kansas, northern Texas also needs to keep an eye on that. We do have excessive rain in the forecast both today and tonight, and then tomorrow as well. That excessive rain expands up into the Midwest and the Great Lakes region here. And then as we get to Tuesday, there's still a slight or marginal risk of some heavy rain all the way to near Cincinnati, Lexington, and Louisville, and all the way down towards the Houston, Texas area. And here's a look at how much rain we may be talking about here. Just in the next 3 days, the potential to see over 7 inches of rain. And I'm going to move that along so you can see farther north, about 3 inches of rain expected all the way into upper Michigan, Wisconsin, western Illinois, and then taking that down into Texas and the Gulf Coast. We do have the potential to see a couple of inches around Shreveport and Tyler, and maybe a few inches in the Houston area as well. So it's a lot of information for you all, but obviously we're going to watch things. I am off the grid later today. I'm not going to be able to do updates on our storm. We may have a depression forming, though, by tonight. And as always, I think I've told you all about this potential for over a week, so I don't think we need to be too surprised at what happens, but we do need to watch out in case the system does get its act together quickly, and we're talking about a quickly forming hurricane. That's the worst case scenario. Best case, it's a weaker system, it's a rainmaker, but something we at least have some more time to watch. So I appreciate everybody's time today. I hope you all have a blessed weekend. As always, I want to give all the honor and glory to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who has given me this gift to be able to bless others. And that's the Spirit of God right there. Timothy tells us, 2 Timothy 1:7, for the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. So do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord or of me, his prisoner. Rather, join with me in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. He has saved us and called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of his own purpose and grace. This grace was given us in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time, but it has now been revealed through the appearing of our Savior, Christ Jesus, who has destroyed death and has brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. And so Paul tells us of his suffering. This is suffering that many Christians go through, but it tells us to not be ashamed and not to be scared because the Lord is with us wherever we go. He has called on us to live a holy life. He has called on us to be bold, but he has also called on us to be humble. And as we head into election season here, election day on Tuesday, that's just a friendly reminder that we need to love each other first. We need to love God first, but we need to take care of each other and not be ashamed of our faith and to vote based on what we believe God wants us to believe. And you know, I'm just going to leave it right there. But I just really pray that those of you who are believers truly want to make a difference in the world, and those of you who are not can see the joy that those who are believers like myself have, because we know what's coming in the end. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we will talk again here tomorrow on Monday. Take care.